The Eagles are less than a day away from closing the regular season against the Washington Commanders. And the most important detail right now isn't the scoreboard, it's the plan. With a wildcard game coming next weekend, the organization has made it clear that health and preparation matter more than chasing one more regular season result. Several starters will be rested, and that decision sets the stage for what this finale is really about. Evaluation, depth, and trust in the roster built to survive January football. Smash the like button if you wear green and white with pride. Because of that approach, the Eagles elevated two players from the practice squad for this game: long snapper Charlie Hewlett and defensive back Brandon Johnson. These moves might not grab national headlines, but they tell you exactly how the coaching staff and front office are thinking right now. Every snap on Sunday has a purpose, even if it comes from players who usually operate in the background. Start with Hewlett, because special teams consistency becomes magnified in the postseason. Hewlett has already played 7 games for the Eagles this season, and the detail that matters most is simple. The team won all 7. He signed a 1-year deal in the offseason and handled long snapping duties for the first 4 games before an abdominal injury sent him to injured reserve. After returning for the last 3 games, he was waived earlier this week, cleared waivers, and came right back to the practice squad. That alone speaks volumes about how the Eagles view him. Not expendable, but situationally managed within the roster rules. There's also the veteran presence factor. Hewlett spent 10 seasons with the Cleveland Browns and served as a team captain there. That experience matters, especially when you're talking about playoff football, where a single bad snap can flip a game. In last week's win over Buffalo, Hewlett snapped for Jake Elliott on 2 field goals and an extra point, contributing to Elliott becoming just the second player in franchise history to surpass 1,000 career points. At the same time, Braden Mann averaged an impressive 55.4 yards on 7 punts. Those are not flashy stats, but they are exactly the kind of quiet efficiency teams need when margins get thin in January. On the defensive side, Brandon Johnson represents the other side of this finale: opportunity. For the 3rd straight game, the Eagles elevated Johnson from the practice squad, and it's important to note that practice squad elevations reset for the playoffs. This isn't a random move. It's a continuation of a process where the coaching staff wants to see more, especially with starters resting. Johnson is a 5'10", 185-pound rookie out of Oregon who entered the league as an undrafted free agent after the 2025 NFL Draft. He made his NFL debut in Week 16 against Washington, logging 5 snaps on defense and 4 on special teams.
Last week in Buffalo, he added 5 more special team snaps. His path hasn't been easy. He battled for a roster spot throughout the preseason, lining up primarily as a nickel defender, was waived during final cutdowns, and then earned his place on the practice squad through steady development during the year. Now, with multiple starters sitting, Johnson could see extended action in the secondary in this rematch with Washington. That matters, because playoff teams don't survive on starters alone. They survive on corners, safeties, and role players who can step in without the entire structure collapsing. Sunday is a live test, not just for Johnson, but for the Eagles' confidence in their depth and preparation. This finale is not about taking a step back. It's about making sure the Eagles are aligned heading into the postseason, trusting veterans like Hewlett to stabilize key moments, and giving young players like Johnson meaningful reps when they matter most. With all that in mind, how do you feel about the Eagles resting starters and using this game to test depth heading into the wild card round? What makes this moment so important is that it pulls back the curtain on how the Eagles truly view the postseason. This isn't about being careless with a regular season finale, and it's definitely not about underestimating Washington. It's about understanding that playoff football demands a different level of precision, especially from areas of the roster most fans don't talk about every week. Depth, health, and execution under pressure are the real currencies now, and Sunday becomes a controlled environment to reinforce all 3. Look again at the decision to elevate Charlie Hewlett. Long snapping is one of those roles you only notice when something goes wrong. The Eagles clearly don't want that kind of uncertainty heading into a wild card game. Hewlett has already proven he can step in seamlessly, even after dealing with injury and roster movement. The fact that he was waived, cleared waivers, and immediately brought back tells you this was procedural, not performance-based. The coaching staff knows exactly what they get from him: reliability, experience, and calm in high-leverage moments. Pair that with Jake Elliott's milestone performance and Braden Mann's efficiency, and you see a special teams unit that is being quietly stabilized at exactly the right time. That matters because postseason games often swing on hidden yards and single possessions. A clean snap, a well-placed punt, a made field goal under pressure, those are playoff plays, even if they don't show up in highlight packages. The Eagles aren't experimenting here, they're reinforcing trust in known quantities before the stakes spike. On the other side, Brandon Johnson represents calculated risk and evaluation. He's not being thrown into this situation blindly. His snaps against Washington in Week 16 and his continued involvement on special teams show a gradual build-up. This is how teams develop young defensive backs without overwhelming them. With starters resting, Johnson isn't just filling space, he's being given a chance to show if his practice habits and preseason flashes can translate when the lights are brighter and the margin for error is thinner. The context of this rematch with Washington also matters. Facing a familiar opponent allows the coaching staff to isolate individual performance without introducing too many unknown variables. For a rookie nickel defender like Johnson, that's invaluable. Every snap becomes film that can be evaluated honestly: leverage, positioning, communication, and reaction speed. These are the details that determine whether a player is just depth on paper or someone you can trust if injuries or fatigue hit during a playoff run. Zooming out, this game becomes a snapshot of organizational philosophy. The Eagles are prioritizing readiness over optics. They're protecting core players while reinforcing the foundation beneath them. Veterans are being positioned to maintain consistency, and young players are being stress-tested in real situations. That balance is hard to achieve, but it's often what separates teams that make noise in January from teams that exit early despite talent. As fans, it's easy to focus solely on wins and losses, but moments like this reveal far more about where a team is headed. This finale is less about Sunday's final score and more about what it says regarding trust, preparation, and internal confidence heading into the wild card round. If this breakdown added clarity to how the Eagles are approaching the end of the regular season and the transition into the playoffs, make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and check out the next video on your screen where we continue breaking down what really matters as this team steps into January. What also can't be ignored is how this situation reinforces the idea that playoff preparation is layered, not rushed. Nothing about these moves suggests panic or improvisation. Instead, it shows a front office and coaching staff that already mapped out scenarios weeks ago. Resting starters isn't a last-minute decision. It's the final step of a plan that assumes the Eagles will need every possible advantage when the games stop allowing mistakes. The regular season has done its job. Now the roster has to prove it can function smoothly even when the usual names aren't on the field. That's where this finale becomes a quiet measuring stick. If the operation runs cleanly with backups and practice squad elevations, it confirms that the system is sound. If special teams execute without issues, it reinforces confidence heading into a wild card environment where nerves and pressure multiply. If a young defensive back like Brandon Johnson handles extended snaps without mental errors, it expands the range of options available to the coaching staff once the playoffs begin. These are subtle gains, but in January, subtle advantages often decide seasons. There's also an internal message being sent. To the veterans, it says their health is valued and protected. To the younger players, it says opportunity is earned and real, not theoretical. When a rookie who fought through the preseason, survived roster cuts, and developed on the practice squad is trusted with meaningful reps, it strengthens accountability across the entire locker room. Everyone understands that preparation matters because opportunity can arrive at any moment. This is why the Eagles aren't treating this game as meaningless. It's meaningful in a different way. It's a final calibration. The margin between being ready and being exposed in the playoffs is razor thin, and Sunday is about tightening those margins. Clean execution, smart rotations, and disciplined football now reduce the chances of chaos later. From a fan perspective, this is the part of the season where patience and perspective matter most. The temptation is always to judge everything through the lens of one result. But this game is about process over outcome, stability over spectacle, and long-term goals over short-term emotion. The Eagles are signaling that they believe their path to postseason success depends on preparation, not momentum built on unnecessary risk. There's one more layer to this that deserves attention, because it directly connects Sunday's decisions to what happens once the margin for error disappears. When teams enter the playoffs, they don't suddenly discover new strengths. They rely on habits already built. This finale is about reinforcing those habits under controlled conditions. Rotations are cleaner. Communication has to be sharper. Players who normally watch from the sideline are suddenly part of a flow. How smoothly that transition happens tells the staff whether the structure holds when stress is applied. Special teams, again, sit at the center of that conversation. Charlie Hewlett's presence is not just about snapping the ball accurately, it's about continuity. The timing between long snapper, holder, and kicker is mechanical, but it's also psychological. Jake Elliott knowing exactly what to expect before the playoffs begin removes one more variable from high-pressure situations. Braden Mann's performance last week already showed how field position can be flipped efficiently when execution is clean. Carrying that stability forward is not optional in postseason football. Defensively, Brandon Johnson's potential extended action serves another purpose beyond his individual evaluation. It allows the Eagles to preserve flexibility. If injuries occur, if matchups demand adjustments, or if fatigue becomes a factor in a long playoff game, having a young defensive back who has already taken meaningful snaps matters. Coaches don't want to introduce players in January who have only lived on the practice field. Sunday gives Johnson a chance to prove he can process the game at full speed, communicate within the secondary, and contribute without being a liability. All of this points back to one central theme: control. The Eagles are controlling what they can before entering an environment where control is limited. You can't dictate officiating, weather, or opponent tendencies in the playoffs. What you can dictate is preparation, health, and clarity of roles. This regular season finale is the last opportunity to tighten those elements without consequences that end a season. For fans, this can feel uncomfortable. There's always a desire to finish strong, to dominate, to send a message. But internally, the message has already been sent. The Eagles believe they are positioned for a playoff run, and they are choosing discipline over impulse. That choice doesn't guarantee success, but history shows it increases the odds of surviving the chaos that defines January football. As this chapter closes and the focus shifts fully to the wild card round, the real question becomes whether this approach builds the confidence and readiness needed when every snap carries weight. As the conversation shifts fully toward the wild card round, what stands out most is how intentional this entire sequence has been. Nothing about these moves suggests uncertainty about direction. Instead, it reflects a team that understands where seasons are truly won and lost. January football exposes weaknesses that were hidden for months, and the Eagles are clearly trying to eliminate as many unknowns as possible before that exposure begins. Sunday's game functions almost like a rehearsal under live conditions. The coaching staff gets confirmation that operational standards remain intact even when personnel changes. Communication on special teams, substitutions on defense, situational awareness late in drives. These details either survive pressure or they don't. Finding that out now, instead of in a playoff game, is a luxury the Eagles have earned by putting themselves in this position. There's also a psychological edge being built here. Resting starters sends a message that the organization trusts its depth and believes the real work is still ahead. That mindset matters. Teams that peak emotionally too early often struggle when adversity hits. The Eagles are choosing restraint, focusing inward rather than chasing external validation. That approach can sharpen focus once the postseason arrives, when every mistake is amplified and every adjustment is scrutinized. For players like Brandon Johnson, this moment can be career-defining. Opportunities like this don't come with announcements or guarantees. They arrive quietly, through preparation and persistence. If he handles his responsibilities, it strengthens the overall defensive structure. If not, the staff learns exactly where limits exist. Either way, clarity is gained, and clarity is invaluable entering playoff football. And for veterans like Charlie Hewlett, this is about reinforcing trust. His role may seem narrow, but the ripple effects of consistency at that position touch every phase of the game. When pressure tightens, familiarity becomes comfort, and comfort can be the difference between execution and collapse. The Eagles are choosing familiarity on purpose. All of this leads to one final reality. The regular season is ending, but the real evaluation is just beginning. Sunday is not about statements or style points. It's about alignment. Alignment between preparation and expectation, between roster construction and usage, and between what the Eagles believe they are and what they will soon be forced to prove. Another element that quietly ties all of this together is how these decisions reflect trust in the structure rather than dependence on individual names. The Eagles are showing that their identity isn't fragile. It doesn't disappear when starters sit or when the spotlight shifts to players further down the depth chart. That confidence only exists when a team believes its standards are clearly defined and consistently enforced. Sunday is about proving that those standards don't change based on who is on the field. This is especially relevant when you think about how quickly playoff games can spiral. One miscommunication, one breakdown in assignment, one special teams error, and momentum flips instantly. By elevating players like Charlie Hewlett and Brandon Johnson now, the Eagles are reducing the number of first-time situations that could appear in January. Hewlett snapping under pressure is no longer a hypothetical. Johnson lining up in live defensive situations is no longer untested. Those experiences matter more than most fans realize. There's also a long-term benefit here that extends beyond one postseason run. When younger players see that preparation leads to opportunity, it reinforces buy-in across the roster. Practice squad players aren't treated as placeholders, they're treated as developing contributors. That culture keeps the bottom of the roster engaged and ready, which becomes critical late in the season when injuries and fatigue inevitably surface. Sunday's finale, then, is less about experimentation and more about confirmation. Confirmation that the system works. Confirmation that depth can be trusted. Confirmation that when the Eagles say they are focused on the postseason, their actions match that message. This is how organizations that consistently contend think. They manage risk, they value information, and they avoid emotional decision-making when the stakes are highest. For fans watching, it may not feel dramatic in the moment, but when the wild card game arrives and the pressure is real, the value of this approach becomes clearer. The Eagles will enter that game knowing exactly who they can rely on, where their margins are, and how prepared they are to handle adversity. When you step back and connect every piece of this, it becomes clear that this finale is functioning as a checkpoint rather than an ending. The Eagles aren't closing a chapter here, they're validating the work that's already been done. This is the moment where preparation either holds together or starts to show cracks, and the organization is deliberately putting that preparation under stress before the playoffs force it into the open. What's happening Sunday is a test of discipline. Discipline to rest key players even when competitive instincts say otherwise. Discipline to trust depth players in real situations. Discipline to value information over emotion. That kind of discipline is often invisible when things are going well, but it becomes obvious when a team is faced with choices like this. The Eagles are choosing long-term stability over short-term gratification, and that tells you a lot about how confident they are in their direction. There's also a competitive edge hidden inside this approach. Players who get opportunities in games like this tend to play with urgency. Brandon Johnson isn't just filling a role, he's playing for relevance, for trust, and for a future place in the rotation. That energy can elevate the level of play across the unit, especially when veterans set the tone and younger players respond to it. The staff gets to evaluate not just physical execution,